The moment Liora Vance realized she was carrying the child of the man now kissing her sister at the altar, she didn't scream. She didn't faint. She sat perfectly still in the third pew, hands folded in her lap like a porcelain doll someone forgot to break. Around her, 200 guests wept with joy. The organ swelled. White roses trembled in the draft from the cathedral doors. And Liora made a decision that would alter the course of 5 lives forever. She would vanish. Not tomorrow. Not after the reception. Tonight. Before anyone noticed the way her dress no longer fit quite right. Before the nausea won. Before he looked at her with those lying eyes and pretended he'd never touched her at all. Stay with me. This is a story about survival, secrets, and the kind of revenge that doesn't need a single word. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. You're going to want to see how this ends. The cathedral smelled like money and lies. Liora sat with her spine straight, her face carefully blank, watching her younger sister Celestia glide down the aisle in a gown that cost more than most families earned in a year. Ivory silk. Hand-beaded lace. A train that required 3 attendants to manage. Celestia looked like something out of a painting. Perfect. Untouchable. Radiant. And at the end of that aisle, waiting with a smile that could melt glaciers, stood Duke Kyle Ardent. Liora's hands tightened in her lap. 6 weeks ago, those hands had been tangled in his hair. 6 weeks ago, he'd whispered her name like a prayer in the darkness of the summer house, told her she was the only thing that mattered, promised her a future that didn't include anyone else. 6 weeks ago, she'd believed him. She was such a fool. "Isn't she beautiful?" her mother whispered from the seat beside her, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. "Our Celestia, a duchess. Can you imagine?" Liora could imagine plenty of things. None of them involved her sister in white. "Stunning," she managed, her voice flat. Her mother didn't notice. Nobody ever noticed Liora unless they needed something from her. She was the older sister, the responsible one, the one who organized the household accounts and remembered everyone's birthdays and never caused a scene. Celestia was the beauty, the prize, the one worth fighting for. Apparently even Kyle had figured that out. The officiant began the ceremony. Liora stopped listening. She focused instead on the stained glass window behind the altar, St. Catherine holding her wheel, face serene even as the blades bit into her flesh. Martyrdom as art. Suffering made beautiful. Liora felt a sharp cramp low in her abdomen and pressed her palm there discreetly. The nausea had been getting worse. This morning she'd barely made it through getting dressed without vomiting. The corset she wore, looser than it should have been, thank God her mother hadn't noticed, felt like it was crushing her lungs. She was 10 weeks along, maybe 11. She'd lost track of time since the night everything had shattered. It had been her father's annual gala. The Vance family threw it every summer. Politicians, merchants, minor nobility, anyone who mattered in the southern territories. Liora had worn blue that night. Kyle had told her it made her eyes look like winter stars. They danced, once, properly, where everyone could see. Then again, later, in the garden where the lanterns didn't quite reach. He'd pulled her into the shadow of the hedge maze, kissed her until her knees went weak, told her he was going to speak to her father the very next day. Ask for her hand. Make it official. She'd believed every word. 2 days later, her father had called her into his study, told her very calmly that Duke Ardent had requested Celestia's hand in marriage, that the match was excellent, that the family was thrilled. Liora had stood there, speechless, while her father went on about alliances and land rights and how fortunate they were that a man of Kyle's standing had chosen a Vance daughter. Any Vance daughter, her father had said, not even looking up from his paperwork. It's all the same to him, I'm sure. That was when Liora understood. She wasn't a person to these people. She was a chess piece, and Kyle had simply chosen the more valuable one. She'd gone to him. Of course she had. Cornered him in the corridor outside the drawing room where he'd been taking tea with Celestia and their mothers. She'd asked him, quietly, desperately, what had happened, why he'd changed his mind. He'd looked at her like she was a stranger. "I don't know what you're talking about," he'd said. Cool, distant. "We danced at your father's party, that's all. If you read something more into common courtesy, I'm sorry for the confusion." Common courtesy. She'd stared at him, waiting for the crack in the mask, the hint that this was some terrible joke. but his face had remained perfectly smooth, perfectly indifferent. "Congratulations on your engagement," she'd whispered, and walked away before he could see her cry. That night, alone in her room, she'd made herself a promise. She would never let anyone make her feel that small again. 3 weeks later, she'd missed her monthly course. Another week after that, the morning sickness started. Now, standing at the altar in his crisp formal uniform, with its gold braiding and ducal insignia, Kyle looked like a man who'd never told a lie in his life. He smiled at Celestia, took her hands gently, spoke his vows in a voice that carried to the back of the cathedral. "I promise to honor you," he said, "to cherish you, to remain faithful in all things." Leora's stomach turned over. Celestia's vows were shorter, breathier. She giggled once, actually giggled, and the guests laughed indulgently. 17 years old and convinced she'd won the grand prize. She had no idea what kind of man she was marrying. Or maybe she did. Maybe that was the point. Maybe Kyle was exactly the kind of man who could smile at one sister while lying to another, and Celestia simply didn't care as long as she got the title. The officiant pronounced them married. Kyle leaned in for the kiss. Liora looked away. The reception was held in the Vance family's main hall, a cavernous room with vaulted ceilings and enough candelabras to light a small city. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, glazed fruits, towers of pastries. Musicians played something light and forgettable. People danced. Liora sat at the family table and picked at a piece of bread, forcing herself to swallow tiny bites. Her mother had noticed her lack of appetite earlier and made a comment about maintaining her figure. Liora had smiled and said she wasn't feeling well. A headache, perhaps. Too much excitement. Her mother had patted her hand absently and gone back to fawning over Celestia. Across the room, Kyle moved through the crowd like he owned it, which, technically, he did, or would, once the marriage contracts were fully executed. The Ardent Duchy was old money, old power. This alliance gave her father access to trade routes he'd been chasing for years. It gave Celestia a title and a fortune. It gave Kyle, what? A pretty wife who adored him? A strategic foothold in the southern territories? Liora didn't know. She didn't care. She was watching the clock on the far wall, counting down the minutes until she could leave. Not just the reception, all of it. The city, the family, the suffocating weight of expectation and decorum, and pretending everything was fine. She'd been planning this for 2 weeks. The moment she'd confirmed the pregnancy, she'd known she couldn't stay. If her father found out, he'd either force her into a marriage with some minor lord willing to overlook the scandal, or he'd send her to a convent in the mountains to disappear quietly. Neither option was acceptable, so she'd made other arrangements. There was a northern settlement called Frost Hollow, 3 days' travel by coach, another 2 by supply wagon. It was a rough place. Miners, trappers, people who'd run out of options or run away from something. The kind of place where nobody asked too many questions. Liora had contacted a woman there, a midwife named Greta, who ran a boarding house for women in difficult circumstances. Greta had written back with a simple message. "Come when you're ready. No judgment here." Liora had sold every piece of jewelry she owned, quietly, through a dealer who didn't ask questions. She had enough money to get there and survive for a few months while she figured out what came next. She'd packed a single trunk, practical clothes, a few books, nothing that would be missed immediately. She'd arranged for a coach to wait for her 2 streets over from the family estate at midnight. All she had to do was make it through the next few hours without falling apart. "Liora!" She looked up. Celestia was bearing down on her, dress swishing, cheeks flushed with champagne and happiness. Behind her, Kyle followed at a polite distance, looking mildly amused by his bride's enthusiasm. "You're so quiet," Celestia pouted, sliding into the chair beside her. "Aren't you happy for me?" "Of course," Liora said. She reached over and squeezed her sister's hand, surprised by how easy the lie came. "You look perfect, don't I?" Celestia beamed. She glanced back at Kyle. "Doesn't she think I look perfect?" Kyle's gaze flicked to Liora for the briefest moment. Something passed across his face, too quick to read. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again, all charm and polish. "Absolutely perfect," he agreed. Liora felt the bread in her stomach turn to lead. Celestia launched into a breathless monologue about the honeymoon, 2 weeks at the Ardent family's coastal estate, then a tour of the northern provinces to meet Kyle's extended family. Liora made appropriate noises of interest and congratulations while her mind spun elsewhere. This was it. The last time she'd see her sister. The last time she'd sit at this table, in this house, pretending to be part of a family that had never really seen her. The last time she'd have to look at Kyle ardent and feel anything at all. When Celestia finally flitted away to greet another group of guests, Kyle lingered. He stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of wine he wasn't drinking. "You're leaving," he said quietly. Leora's blood went cold. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was still low, but there was an edge to it now. "You've barely looked at anyone all night. You're not eating. You keep checking the exits." He paused. "Where are you going?" She met his eyes. Up close, they were still the same blue-gray she remembered, the same ones that had looked at her with something she'd mistaken for love. Now they were unreadable. "Why do you care?" she asked. "I don't." The words came quickly, too quickly. "But if you're planning to do something foolish," she repeated. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, bitter and sharp. "Like trusting someone who swore he loved me? Like believing words whispered in the dark actually meant something?" His jaw tightened. "Liora, don't." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby guests glanced over. Liora forced a smile and lowered her voice. "Don't say my name like it means anything to you. You made your choice. Enjoy your wedding." She walked away before he could respond, cutting through the crowd toward the far door that led to the gardens. She needed air, needed space, needed to not be in the same room as him for one more second. The gardens were cool and dark, lit only by scattered torches along the main paths. Liora found a bench near the fountain and sat, pressing her palms to her face, breathing slowly. 6 hours. That's all she had to endure. 6 more hours of playing the dutiful sister, the gracious loser, the woman who was fine. Everything was fine. Then she'd be free. "Liora?" She jumped, turned. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not Kyle, thank God. Her younger brother, Marcus. 16, awkward, perpetually uncomfortable in formal clothes. He approached cautiously, like she might bolt. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're lying." He sat beside her without asking, hands dangling between his knees. "You've been weird for weeks, ever since the engagement." Liora looked at him. Marcus was the only one in the family who'd ever really paid attention to her, the only one who'd noticed when she stopped smiling. "I'm just tired," she said. "You're leaving, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. Liora closed her eyes. "Marcus, I'm not going to stop you." He stared at the fountain. "I don't know what happened, but I know something did, and I know you don't lie unless you have to." He paused. "So if you need to go, go. I'll cover for you." She felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why?" "Because you're my sister," he said simply, "and because you deserve better than this." She reached over and hugged him, sudden and fierce. He stiffened in surprise, then hugged her back. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Father's going to be furious." "Let him," Liora pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm done trying to make him proud." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good." They sat together in the dark until the noise from the reception swelled again. More music, more laughter, the sound of glasses being raised in endless toasts. Eventually Marcus stood and offered his hand. "Come on, we should go back before they send a search party." Liora let him pull her to her feet. Together, they walked back into the light. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Liora danced when required, smiled when expected, accepted congratulations from people who didn't know her and didn't care. She watched Celestia and Kyle cut the cake. Watched them dance. Watched the way he looked at her sister, attentive, gentle, every inch the devoted husband. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, Liora just felt numb. At 11:30, she slipped away. No grand exit, no tearful goodbyes. She simply walked up the main stairs like she was going to bed, then kept walking, past her room, down the servants' corridor, out the side door that was always left unlocked for the kitchen staff. The night air hit her like a slap. She pulled her cloak tighter and started walking. 2 streets over, the coach was waiting exactly where it was supposed to be. The driver barely glanced at her as she climbed in. just tipped his hat and clicked his tongue at the horses. They lurched into motion. Liora didn't look back. She'd expected to feel something, grief, regret, fear. Instead, she felt strangely calm, like a door had closed on one life and another was beginning. She didn't know what waited for her in Frost Hollow, didn't know if she'd survive it, but she knew she couldn't stay here, not anymore. The coach rattled through empty streets, heading north. Liora rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the slight swell there. In a few months, there would be a baby. Maybe two, if the midwife's suspicions about twins were correct. Children who would grow up knowing their mother had chosen them over everything else. She'd tell them the truth someday. Not all of it, maybe. But enough. Enough so they'd understand that love wasn't something you begged for, that dignity mattered more than comfort, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away. The city lights faded behind them. Ahead, the road stretched into darkness. Liora closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the wheels carry her forward. 3 days later, she arrived in Frost Hollow as the sun was setting. The settlement was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 200 people scattered across a valley between pine-covered hills. The buildings were rough timber and stone, built for function rather than beauty. Smoke curled from chimneys. A few people moved between structures, bundled against the cold. The coach driver helped her down and unloaded her trunk without comment. Liora paid him, added a tip for his discretion, and watched him drive away. Then she turned and looked at the town that would be her home. A woman was approaching, older, heavy-set, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a braid. She wore a wool dress and sturdy boots, and her eyes were sharp as she took in Leora's travel-stained cloak and pale face. "You the girl from the south?" she asked. "I'm Liora." "Greta." The woman stuck out her hand. Liora shook it. Greta's grip was firm, calloused. "You look half dead. When'd you last eat?" "This morning, I think." Christ. Greta picked up one end of the trunk like it weighed nothing. "Come on. You can stay in the room at the end of the hall. It's small, but it's warm, and the roof doesn't leak. We'll get some food in you, then you can sleep." Liora followed her down a muddy street toward a 2-story building with light spilling from its windows. Inside it was warm and smelled like stew. A handful of women sat around a large table talking quietly. They looked up when Liora entered, but didn't stare, just nodded and went back to their conversations. Greta led her upstairs down a narrow hallway and pushed open a door. The room was exactly as promised, small, clean, warm. A bed with thick quilts, a washstand, a chair by the window. "Privy's out back," Greta said. "Meals are at 8, noon, and 6. If you need anything, I'm usually in the kitchen. Questions?" "Why are you helping me?" Liora asked. Greta gave her a long look. "Because somebody helped me once, when I needed it, and because I know what it looks like when a woman's running from something." She paused. "You safe here? Anyone coming after you?" "No one's coming." "Good." Greta set the trunk down. "Get settled. I'll bring you up some stew." She left, closing the door gently behind her. Liora sat on the bed and let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stilled. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not because she was sad exactly, because the adrenaline was draining away and the fear, and all that was left was exhaustion and the strange, fragile hope that maybe, she'd made the right choice. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window. Somewhere in the valley, a dog barked. The sounds were unfamiliar, foreign. Liora lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she just needed to rest. And in the darkness, with her hand on her belly, she whispered a promise to the lives growing inside her. "I will keep you safe, no matter what." The baby came in the middle of a January blizzard. Liora had been hauling firewood when the first contraction hit, a sharp twist low in her belly that made her drop the logs and grab the doorframe. She'd stood there, breathing through her teeth, while snow whipped sideways across the yard. "Inside!" Greta had barked from the kitchen window. "Now!" That had been 14 hours ago. Now Liora was on her hands and knees on the bedroom floor, nightgown soaked with sweat, hair plastered to her face. Another contraction rolled through her like a wave trying to break her spine. She heard herself make a sound, half groan, half growl, that didn't seem human. "That's it," Greta said from somewhere behind her. "Don't fight it. Let your body do the work. Easy for you to say, Liora gasped. I've done this 6 times, girl. Wasn't easy once. Liora would have laughed if she'd had the breath for it. Instead, she focused on the knot in the floorboard directly in front of her nose, counting the rings in the wood, trying to breathe the way Greta had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In, out. Don't panic. The contraction eased. Liora sagged forward, forehead resting on her forearms. How much longer? She whispered. Soon. Greta's hand was on her back, steady and warm. You're close. I can see the head. Head. Singular. Liora had been half convinced the midwife was wrong about twins. 4 months of pregnancy had passed before she'd even confirmed it. Too sick to think straight, too focused on survival to worry about details. When Greta had finally examined her properly and announced there were 2 heartbeats, Liora had stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd done to deserve this particular cosmic joke. 2 babies. Alone. In the middle of nowhere. She'd cried for an hour, then gotten up and started making plans. Another contraction hit. This one was different, sharper, more urgent. Her body bore down without asking permission. Liora heard herself scream. Good, Greta said. Again, push. Liora pushed. The pain was unreal. It wiped out everything else, the room, the storm, the past 5 months. There was only this moment, this impossible pressure, this feeling like she was being split in half. Then, suddenly, release. A baby's cry cut through the air, thin and furious. Liora collapsed onto her side, shaking. Greta was moving quickly, efficiently, wrapping the baby in a blanket. When she held it up for Liora to see, the infant's face was red and scrunched, mouth wide open in protest. Girl, Greta said. Small, but loud. Good lungs. Liora reached for her daughter with trembling hands. The baby was impossibly tiny, impossibly perfect. Dark hair plastered to her skull, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving. Hello? Liora whispered. The baby kept screaming. Don't get too comfortable, Greta said. You've got another one coming. The second baby took another 40 minutes. By the time he arrived, because of course the second one was a boy, Liora was so exhausted she could barely hold him. Greta placed him on her chest while she dealt with the afterbirth, and Liora stared down at her son's face, trying to make sense of the fact that she'd just brought 2 whole people into the world. He was bigger than his sister, with a thatch of dark hair and a surprisingly calm demeanor. He opened his eyes once, seemed to take stock of his surroundings, and promptly fell asleep. Efficient? Greta observed. That one's going to be practical. And her? Liora asked, glancing at the girl still fussing in the basket beside the bed. That one's going to be trouble, Liora laughed weakly. Perfect. By the time Greta finished cleaning up and left her alone, dawn was breaking. The storm had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the window, turning the frost on the glass into lace. Liora lay propped against the pillows, a baby in each arm, and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. She'd made it through the pregnancy. Barely. Morning sickness had lasted well into the 5th month. Her back had ached constantly. She'd had to let out every piece of clothing she owned, then buy new things when even that wasn't enough. Greta had been patient and practical, explaining everything in blunt terms that left no room for romantic illusions about motherhood. It's going to hurt, she'd said. You're going to bleed. You're going to want to quit. But you won't, because once they're here, you won't have a choice. She'd been right about all of it. Liora looked down at her children, her daughter with her fierce little face, her son with his steady breathing. They didn't look like Kael. Not yet. Right now, they just looked like themselves. She'd thought about him more than she wanted to admit during the pregnancy. Wondered if he'd noticed she was gone. Wondered if Celestia had said anything, or if the family had simply covered it up. The responsible daughter, gone off to live with a distant aunt. A convenient fiction. The Vances were good at those. It didn't matter. That life was over. You're mine, Liora whispered to the babies. Just mine. And I'm going to make sure you never need anyone else. The girl yawned. The boy slept on. Outside, the settlement was waking up. Voices calling, doors opening, the sound of shovels scraping snow. Liora closed her eyes and let herself rest. Naming them took 2 days. Liora stared at her children and ran through every name she could think of, rejecting most of them immediately. Nothing from her family. She wouldn't give these babies anything that tied them to the Vances. Nothing classical or pretentious. They needed names that were strong, simple, names they could grow into. Finally, she chose. Rowan for the boy, Mira for the girl. Greta nodded approvingly when she told her. Good names. They'll do. The first year was brutal. Liora had expected it to be hard. She hadn't expected it to be relentless. The babies cried in shifts. When one slept, the other screamed. They needed to be fed every 2 hours, day and night. Leora's body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands cracked and bled from constant washing. She lived in a fog of exhaustion so thick she sometimes forgot what day it was. But she kept going. Because Greta was right. She didn't have a choice. Greta helped when she could, and the other women in the boarding house pitched in when they had time. But Frost Hollow wasn't the kind of place where you could afford to be precious about motherhood. Everyone worked. Everyone pulled their weight. Liora learned to strap the babies to her chest and improvise slings and haul water with them sleeping against her. She learned to cook one-handed, clean one-handed, do everything one-handed while the other arm held a child. She learned to survive. When the twins were 8 months old, Greta cornered her in the kitchen. You need to start thinking about the future, she said. Liora was washing dishes. Rowan was asleep in a basket by the fire. Mira was on the floor, gnawing on a wooden spoon and glaring at nothing in particular. I think about the future constantly, Liora said. I mean money. Greta pulled out a chair and sat. You've got enough saved to last another few months, maybe. Then what? Liora had been avoiding this question. She set down the plate she was washing and dried her hands slowly. I don't know, she admitted. You're educated, Greta said. I've seen the books you brought. You can read, write, do figures. That's more than half this town. So the school here is a joke. We've got 20 kids and one teacher who can barely spell his own name. Town council's been talking about replacing him for years, but nobody wants the job. Greta leaned forward. You could do it. Liora stared at her. I've never taught before. You've never had twins before either. Didn't stop you. That's different. Not really, Greta shrugged. You figure things out. That's what you do. And those kids need someone who actually gives a damn. The current teacher sure doesn't. Liora picked up another plate. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Winter's coming. Jobs dry up when the snow hits. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she went to the town council meeting and offered her services. The council, 5 men, 3 of whom looked like they'd never opened a book in their lives, had been skeptical at first. A woman, a newcomer, a single mother with bastard twins, but they were also desperate. And when Liora demonstrated that she could actually teach, reading a passage from one of her books, working through a math problem on the chalkboard they'd dragged in for the occasion, outlining a curriculum that made sense, they'd agreed to a trial period, 2 weeks. If the kids learned something and the parents didn't complain, the job was hers. Liora threw herself into it. The schoolhouse was a disaster. 1 room, drafty, with a leaking roof and benches that wobbled. The previous teacher had apparently spent most of his time drunk, which explained why half the students couldn't read past a first-grade level despite being 12 years old. Liora started from scratch. She grouped the kids by ability instead of age, created lesson plans that actually built on each other, and refused to tolerate nonsense. When a boy in the back row threw a rock at another student on the second day, Liora confiscated his slingshot and made him write a 100-word essay on why violence wasn't a solution to boredom. 100 words, he'd protested. I don't know 100 words. Then you'll learn, Liora had said calmly. Due tomorrow. He'd turned it in. Barely literate, full of spelling errors, but he'd done it, and he hadn't thrown another rock. By the end of 2 weeks, attendance was up. Kids were actually doing homework. Parents stopped by to say their children were excited about school, which apparently hadn't happened in years. The council offered her the job permanently. Liora accepted. The pay wasn't much, barely enough to cover rent and food, but it was steady, and it came with something more valuable than money. Purpose. Liora had spent 5 months adrift, focused entirely on survival. Now she had something to wake up for beyond just keeping the twins alive. She was good at teaching, better than she'd expected. She liked the challenge of figuring out how each student learned, the satisfaction of watching a concept click into place. And the kids liked her, or at least respected her. She was strict but fair, didn't play favorites, and actually seemed to care whether they succeeded. For the first time since leaving the capital, Liora felt like herself again. Not the girl who'd been discarded, not the desperate runaway, just herself. The twins grew. Rowan was walking by 10 months, steady and determined. Mira took her first steps at 11 months, fell flat on her face, and immediately tried again. By their first birthday, they were both mobile and opinionated. Rowan was quiet, watchful. He'd sit for an hour playing with blocks, building elaborate structures, and then carefully dismantling them. He cried rarely and seemed content to observe the world rather than demanding its attention. Mira was the opposite. She was loud, fearless, and perpetually in motion. She climbed everything, grabbed everything, and had a temper that could clear a room. When she wanted something, she made sure everyone knew it. "Your daughter's going to be a handful," Greta said one evening, watching Mira try to scale the kitchen table while Rowan sat peacefully with a picture book. "She already is," Liora said. "Takes after her mother, I'd say." Liora snorted. "I was never like that." "No?" Greta gave her a knowing look. "You crossed half the country alone and pregnant to start over in a place where you didn't know anyone. You're raising 2 kids by yourself and teaching 20 more. Seems pretty fearless to me." Liora didn't know what to say to that. She'd never thought of herself as fearless. Desperate, maybe. Stubborn, but not fearless. Maybe that's what fearless was, though. Doing it anyway, even when you were terrified. The years passed faster than Liora expected. The twins turned 2, then 3, then 4. Frost Hollow became home. Not the place she'd imagined spending her life, but home nonetheless. She knew everyone in town. The baker saved the day-old bread for her. The blacksmith let Rowan watch him work. The women at the boarding house looked after the twins when Liora had evening council meetings. It wasn't easy. Money was always tight. The twins got sick more often than she'd like. Colds, fevers, the endless parade of childhood ailments. Liora spent more than one night awake, pressing cool cloths to fevered foreheads and praying they'd make it through. They always did. Mira turned out to be brilliant, sharp as a knife and twice as dangerous. She could read by the time she was 4, not because Liora had pushed her, but because she'd simply taught herself by watching the older students at school. She asked questions constantly, most of them impossible to answer. Why is the sky blue? Where does the wind come from? If you cut a worm in half, do you get 2 worms? Rowan was quieter, but just as smart. He understood numbers the way most kids understood breathing. Give him a handful of coins and he could tell you the total instantly. Show him a broken machine and he'd figure out how to fix it. They were extraordinary children. Liora told herself that every day, even on the days when Mira threw a tantrum in the middle of the street or Rowan refused to talk to anyone for 6 hours straight, she loved them so fiercely it scared her sometimes. The thought of losing them, to illness, to accident, to anything, was unbearable. She'd wake in the night and check that they were breathing just to be sure. When the twins were 5, a letter arrived. Liora had been at the schoolhouse working through arithmetic problems with the older students when Greta appeared in the doorway. The older woman's face was grim. "Someone's here," she said. "At the house. Looking for you." Liora's blood went cold. "Who?" "Wouldn't say. Just asked if a woman named Liora Vance was living here." Leora's hands tightened on the chalk. She turned to the students. "Keep working. I'll be back." She followed Greta out, mind racing. Nobody from her old life knew where she was. She'd been so careful. No letters, no contact, nothing that could be traced. For 5 years, she'd been invisible. So who the hell had found her? The man waiting in Greta's parlor was unfamiliar, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the careful posture of someone used to dealing with important people. He stood when Liora entered, and she saw his eyes flick briefly to her worn dress, her work-roughened hands. "Miss Vance," he said, "my name is Thomas Carver. I'm an attorney." Leora's stomach dropped. "I don't go by that name anymore." "I'm aware." He gestured to the chairs. "May we sit?" "I'd rather stand." "As you wish." Carver pulled a letter from his jacket. "I've been retained by Duke Cale Ardent to locate you. He—" "Get out." Carver blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, get out." Leora's voice was steady, but her heart was hammering. "I don't know how you found me, and I don't care. I have nothing to say to Duke Ardent. Not now, not ever. Miss Vance, if you'd just listen—" "No." She moved toward the door, opened it. "Leave, now, before I have the sheriff escort you out." Carver didn't move. "He doesn't know about the children." Liora froze. "Your family told him you were dead," Carver continued quietly. "Died of fever 6 months after the wedding. He believed them. Until 3 weeks ago, when your brother Marcus showed up at his estate and told him the truth." Marcus. Leora's breath caught. She hadn't heard from her brother in 5 years. She'd specifically asked him not to contact her, to let her disappear completely. What had changed? "Why?" she managed. "Your father's dead," Carver said. "Heart failure. Marcus inherited the estate. First thing he did was tell Duke Ardent that you were alive, and that your disappearance was orchestrated." Leora's mind was spinning. Her father, dead. The man who'd traded her like livestock, who'd chosen political advantage over his own daughter's happiness. She waited to feel something, grief, satisfaction, anything. But there was only numbness. "That still doesn't explain why you're here," she said. "Duke Ardent wants to speak with you. He's asked me to deliver a message. He's coming to Frost Hollow. He'll arrive in approximately 3 days. The room tilted. "What?" "He's traveling north as we speak. He wanted me to go ahead, to ensure you wouldn't disappear again." Carver's expression softened slightly. "Miss Vance, I don't know what happened between you and the Duke, but I do know he's been searching for you for 3 weeks. He's turned over every stone in the Southern Territories. And when he finds out you have children—" "He won't," Liora said sharply. "You're not going to tell him. I'm bound by attorney-client privilege not to disclose information without his consent. But Miss Vance, he's coming here. He'll see them himself." Liora felt the walls closing in. 5 years. 5 years of building a life, of creating safety, of making sure her children never had to know the man who'd thrown her away. And now he was coming. In 3 days. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why does he care now?" Carver hesitated. "That's not my place to say. You'll have to ask him yourself." He set the letter on the table and moved toward the door, paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Vance, I think you should hear him out. Whatever you believe happened, there may be more to the story." Then he was gone. Liora stood frozen in the parlor, staring at the letter like it might explode. Greta appeared in the doorway. "Well?" she asked. "He's coming," Liora said. "Kael, he's coming here." The father. It wasn't a question. Liora had never told Greta the full story, but the older woman wasn't stupid. She'd put the pieces together years ago. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? Liora could run again, pack up the twins, disappear deeper into the territories where even attorneys couldn't find her. Start over, again, or she could stay. Face him, make him see what his choices had cost. "I don't know," Liora said. That night she lay awake while the twins slept in the room next door. She'd read Carver's letter 3 times. It was short, formal, and said almost nothing. "I must speak with you. Please wait for my arrival. K.A." No apology, no explanation, just a command dressed up as a request. Liora wanted to burn it. Instead, she folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. 3 days. That's all she had. She spent the next morning teaching like normal, but her mind was elsewhere. The students noticed. She had to repeat herself twice, forgot to collect homework, let the lunch break run 20 minutes long. By the time she dismissed them, her hands were shaking. Greta was waiting when she got home. "You need a plan." "I have a plan. Ignore him until he leaves." "That's not a plan. That's avoidance." Greta pulled out a chair and pointed at it. Liora sat. "Listen. This man is coming whether you like it or not. You can either hide and let him control the situation, or you can decide how this goes. I don't want him here at all." "I know, but he's coming. So what do you want him to see?" Liora looked up. "What do you mean? Do you want him to see a woman who ran away and never recovered? Or do you want him to see exactly what he lost?" Liora stared at her. Slowly, an idea began to form. Dangerous, reckless. Exactly the kind of thing she'd spent 5 years trying not to be. "Tell me what you're thinking," Greta said. Liora took a breath. "If he's coming here to find me, he's going to see everything. The life I built. The children I raised. All of it." She met Greta's eyes. And then I'm going to make him understand that he gave up his right to any of it the moment he chose my sister." Greta smiled slowly. Now that's a plan. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Liora prepared the twins carefully, telling them that an important visitor was coming, someone from her old life. She didn't explain who. Not yet. They were too young to understand the full story anyway. Mira was excited. Rowan was cautious. Both asked 100 questions Liora couldn't answer. On the third day, she woke before dawn and dressed carefully. Not in her work clothes, but in the one good dress she'd kept from her old life. Deep green wool, simple but well made. She braided her hair, scrubbed her hands until they stopped looking quite so rough. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not the girl who'd fled the capital. Not quite the woman she'd become, something in between. The twins were eating breakfast when the knock came. Leora's heart stopped. She looked at Greta, who nodded. "Stay here," Liora told the children. Then she walked to the door and opened it. Kael Arden stood on the porch and time stopped. He looked older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray threading through his dark hair. He wore traveling clothes, practical, not formal, and his boots were dusty. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then, from behind her, Mira's voice rang out. "Mama, who is it?" Kael's eyes went wide. His gaze dropped, past Liora, into the house, where 2 5-year-old children sat at the kitchen table, staring back at him with matching expressions of curiosity. The color drained from his face. "Liora," he whispered. "What?" She met his eyes and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Hello, Kael," she said. "We need to talk." Kael couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His eyes were locked on the 2 children sitting at the table, a boy and a girl, dark-haired, staring at him with identical expressions of wary curiosity. 5 years old, maybe 6. The math crashed into him like a freight train. "Inside," Liora said quietly, "unless you want the whole town watching." He followed her in mechanically, his legs moving without consulting his brain. The house was small, warm, cluttered with the debris of daily life. Books stacked on shelves, children's drawings pinned to the walls, a basket of mending by the fire. It smelled like bread and wood smoke. Nothing like the cold marble halls of his estate. Liora closed the door behind him. An older woman, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, stood near the kitchen, arms crossed. She looked at Kael the way someone might look at a snake that had slithered into the house uninvited. "Greta, can you take the twins upstairs?" Liora asked. "No," Kael said. The word came out hoarse. He cleared his throat. "Please, I need—" He stopped, not sure what he needed. To confirm what he was seeing was real, to understand how his entire world had just detonated. Leora's jaw tightened. "Greta, upstairs." The older woman nodded. "Come on, you two. Let's go read." "But Mama, the girl started. "Now, Mira." The little girl, Mira, huffed but slid off her chair. The boy followed silently, casting one last glance at Kael before disappearing up the narrow staircase. Greta went with them, closing a door firmly overhead. Silence dropped like a curtain. Kael stood in the middle of the room, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Liora moved to the window, putting distance between them. Her posture was rigid, defensive. "Say something," she said finally. "They're mine." It wasn't a question. "Yes." The word hit him like a punch. Kael's knees went weak. He reached for the back of a chair to steady himself. "How? When?" "You know when." Her voice was flat. "You were there." The summer house. The night before her father's gala. He remembered it in fragments. Her laugh. The way she'd looked at him like he hung the moon. The softness of her skin under his hands. He'd told himself afterward it had been a mistake, that nothing that good could last, that he'd been a fool to think, "You never told me," he said. Leora's laugh was bitter. "Told you? When, exactly? At your wedding to my sister? During the reception? Maybe I should have interrupted the vows. After. You could have what, Kael?" She whirled on him, and he saw the fury burning beneath her careful control. "Shown up at your door pregnant and begging? Asked your new wife for permission to ruin her marriage. I had more pride than that. So you just left. His voice rose despite himself. Disappeared. Let everyone think you were dead. I didn't let anyone think anything. My family made that choice. Apparently lying runs in our blood. Cale flinched. Marcus said, he told me your father intercepted my letters, that he forged a message from you saying you never wanted to see me again, that everything between us was a lie? Leora's eyes were hard. Is that the story you're going with? It's the truth. The truth. She crossed the room in 3 strides, getting close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the faint scar on her chin she'd gotten falling from a horse when they were younger. The truth is, you looked me in the eye 2 days after you'd been inside me and told me you didn't know what I was talking about. Common courtesy, you called it. Like I was some delusional girl making up fantasies. The memory hit him. He'd been in the hallway, surrounded by people. She'd looked desperate, heartbroken, and he'd felt, what? Panic? Confusion? His father had been standing 10 feet away, watching. The marriage contracts were already signed. Everything had been decided. I couldn't acknowledge it, he said quietly. Not there. Not then. But I tried to find you afterward. Don't. Liora held up a hand. Don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better. You made a choice. You chose your title, your alliance, your political convenience. And I made a choice too. I chose to survive. With my children. My children. The correction was sharp. I carried them. I birthed them. I raised them alone for 5 years while you played happy families with my sister. They're mine, KL. You're just the man who contributed half their blood and nothing else. The words should have made him angry. Instead, they just made him feel hollow. He looked toward the stairs where the children had disappeared. What are their names? Liora hesitated. Rowan and Mira. Can I meet them properly? No. Liora, you don't get to walk in here after 5 years and demand anything. Her voice shook slightly, the only sign her composure was cracking. You don't get to play father because it's suddenly convenient. They don't know who you are. They don't need to know. They have a right. They have a right to stability, to safety, to a life that doesn't involve a man who threw their mother away the moment she became inconvenient. Liora moved back to the window, arms wrapped around herself. You need to leave. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Walk out the door, get on your horse, and go back to your perfect duchess and your perfect life. Cale laughed, a short, broken sound. Perfect. Right. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to organize thoughts that kept scattering. My marriage to Celestia lasted 8 months. Liora turned slowly. What? She ran off with a cavalry officer, some captain with good cheekbones and a talent for poetry. Left me a note saying she'd never loved me, that the whole thing had been her father's idea. He met Leora's eyes. Your father's idea, I should say. Leora's face was unreadable. When? 5 years ago. Almost to the day. Cale pulled out a chair and sat before his legs gave out entirely. Turns out she'd been seeing him the whole time we were engaged. The wedding was just a way to secure the alliance. Once the contracts were signed, once her family had what they wanted, she didn't need to pretend anymore. Where is she now? No idea. Last I heard, they were in the eastern provinces, living on his officer's salary and her jewelry. He laughed again, humorless. I could have had the marriage annulled, pursued her for breach of contract, but honestly, I was relieved. The whole thing was a disaster from the start. Liora sank into the chair across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus told me everything, Cale said finally. How your father manipulated both of us. The forged letters, the lies about your feelings, the story about you dying. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm not asking you to forgive me for believing it. I'm just asking you to understand that I didn't know. I thought you'd rejected me. Thought I was doing the honorable thing by stepping back. Honorable, Liora repeated softly. You married my sister. I married the woman your father told me you wanted me to marry. He showed me a letter in your handwriting, or what I thought was your handwriting, saying you'd realized we were a mistake, that you'd never wanted anything serious, that you hoped I'd be happy with Celestia. Cale's hands clenched. It was all bullshit, but I didn't know that then. Leora's eyes were closed. She looked exhausted. Even if that's true, even if he manipulated everything, You still chose to believe I was that cruel, that I'd sleep with you and then laugh it off. I was 23 years old and terrified, Kyle said quietly. My father had just died. I'd inherited a duchy I wasn't ready for, responsibilities I didn't understand. Your father was the only advisor I trusted, and he told me marrying Celestia would secure trade routes we desperately needed, that it was my duty. He paused. I was a coward. I chose the easier path. I won't pretend otherwise. Liora opened her eyes. Why are you here, Kyle? What do you want? I want to know my children. No. Liora. They're 5 years old. They have a life, a routine, friends, school. They don't need a stranger showing up and turning everything upside down. I'm not a stranger. I'm their father. You're the Duke of Ardent, Liora shot back. You're a title and a fortune and a life they'll never be part of. What are you going to do? Take them back to your estate? Parade them around as your bastards? Give them a room in the servants' quarters and pretend that's enough? That's not... I wouldn't... Kyle stopped, frustrated. I don't know what I'm going to do. I found out they existed 3 hours ago, but I know I can't just walk away. Why not? You're good at it. The barb landed. Kyle absorbed it, nodded slowly. You're right, I am, but I'm trying to be better. Upstairs, a door opened, small footsteps on the floorboards. Liora stiffened. Mama? Mira's voice drifted down. Can we come down now? Greta says we have to ask you. Liora glanced at Kale, something complicated passing across her face. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. Give us a few more minutes, she called back. But I'm bored. Read your book. I already finished it. Then start another one. A dramatic sigh, then retreating footsteps. Kyle almost smiled. She sounds like you. She's nothing like me. She argues like you. Gets that same stubborn set to her voice when she doesn't get her way. Liora looked at him sharply. How would you know how I argue? You barely knew me. I knew you well enough to fall in love with you, Kale said quietly. The room went still. Leora's expression shuddered immediately. Don't, she whispered. It's true. I was going to propose to you that summer. Had the ring commissioned and everything. Then your father... Stop. Liora stood abruptly. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up here and rewrite the past with pretty words. I don't care if you loved me. I don't care if my father lied. None of it changes what happened. None of it changes the fact that I went through hell alone. I know. You don't know. Her voice cracked. You don't know what it's like to give birth to twins in the middle of a blizzard with no doctor, no medicine, just a midwife and a prayer. You don't know what it's like to watch your children get sick and not be able to afford real treatment. You don't know what it's like to work yourself to the bone every single day just to keep them fed and safe. Kyle stood too. You're right, I don't know, but I want to. I want to... What? Help? Liora laughed bitterly. I don't need your help. I've managed fine without you. Have you? Kale looked around the small room, taking in the mended curtains, the well-worn furniture, the stack of bills on the desk. Because it looks like you're barely scraping by. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the moment the words left his mouth. Leora's face went white. Get out. I didn't mean... I said get out. Her voice was shaking now, fury and something deeper, hurt, maybe, or shame. Take your pity and your regret and your convenient timing and leave. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt. I don't want anything from you except your absence. Liora, please. The door at the top of the stairs opened again. This time, both children appeared. The boy, Rowan, standing protectively in front of his sister. He looked down at them with serious dark eyes. Mama's upset, he said to Greta, who appeared behind them. That man's making her upset. Kale felt something crack inside his chest. The boy was small, maybe a little too thin, with his mother's stubborn chin and eyes that were eerily familiar, because they were Kale's eyes, his father's eyes, the ardent gray blue that ran through 7 generations. I'm not trying to upset her, Kale said, looking up at his son. I just wanted to talk. Rowan stared at him for a long moment. You should go. You're not welcome here. The words, delivered in such a calm, matter-of-fact tone from a 5-year-old, hit harder than any of Leora's anger. Kale felt his throat tighten. Rowan, Liora said quietly. It's all right. He's making you sad. The boy's voice didn't waver. I don't like it. Mira pushed past her brother, marching down the stairs with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't yell at. Who are you? Why are you here? Mira, Greta warned. I'm just asking. The girl planted herself in front of Kael, hands on her hips. Up close, she looked even more like Liora, the same stubborn tilt to her jaw, the same fire in her eyes. But her coloring was all ardent. Dark hair, fair skin, that distinctive gray-blue gaze. Kael crouched down to her level. My name is Kael. I'm an old friend of your mother's. Are you the reason she's crying? Kael's eyes flicked to Liora. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I think I might be, he admitted. Then you should apologize. Mira crossed her arms. That's what Mama makes us do when we hurt someone's feelings. Mira, that's enough, Liora said. Her voice was steadier now, though her hands were trembling. Go back upstairs. But now. Something in her tone brooked no argument. Mira huffed but turned and stomped back up the stairs. Rowan followed more slowly, still watching Kael with that unnerving, steady gaze. When they were gone, Liora sagged slightly. She moved to the table and sat, suddenly looking very tired. Kael stayed crouched where he was, not sure if standing would make things better or worse. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for all of it, for believing the lies, for not fighting harder, for not being there. I don't want your apologies. What do you want? Liora was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want the last 5 years back. I want my sister not to have betrayed me. I want my father to have been someone different. I want... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter what I want. None of it's possible. Kael stood slowly and moved to the chair across from her. What if I stayed here in Frost Hollow, got to know them gradually, let them get used to me? Why would you do that? Because they're my children, because I've already missed 5 years, and I'm not missing any more. He leaned forward. Because you deserve help, whether you want to admit it or not. And because maybe we can figure out some way forward that doesn't involve one of us disappearing. Liora looked at him for a long moment. He could see her thinking, weighing options, calculating risks. It was a look he remembered from when they were younger, Liora running through chess moves in her head, 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If you stay, she said finally, there are rules. All right? You don't tell anyone who you are, not the children, not the town. As far as anyone's concerned, you're just someone passing through who decided to stay for a while. Kael nodded slowly. Agreed. You don't make promises you can't keep. No grand gestures, no expensive gifts. The children have learned to live without those things. I won't let you teach them to want what they can't have. Fair enough. And if at any point I decide this isn't working, if they're confused or upset, or if you do anything that makes me think you're going to hurt them, you leave. Immediately. No arguments. Understood. Leora's hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. I don't trust you, Kael. I don't know if I ever will again, but Rowan and Mira deserve to know where they come from, who their father is, even if he's... She stopped, searching for words. Even if he's flawed. I am flawed, Kael said quietly. Deeply. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the settlement was coming to life. Voices calling, the sound of horses, someone hammering at the blacksmiths. Normal sounds. A normal day. Except everything had changed. There's an inn in town, Liora said finally. Patterson's. It's not much, but it's clean. You can stay there while we figure this out. Thank you. She stood abruptly. I need to get to the school. I'm already late. She paused at the base of the stairs. Don't come by unannounced. If you want to see them, you ask me first, and I decide when and how. All right, Liora called up to Greta, who appeared with the children a moment later. They looked wary, confused. Mira was whispering something to Rowan, who shook his head slightly. Liora kissed each of them on the forehead. Be good for Greta. I'll be home this afternoon. Is that man staying? Mira asked, pointing at Kael. No, he's going to the inn. Good. Mira glared at him one more time for good measure, then grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him toward the kitchen. Rowan looked back once. His expression was impossible to read. Liora walked Kyle to the door. She opened it, but didn't step outside. "I meant what I said," she told him quietly. "If you hurt them, I'll make you regret it." Kyle believed her. "I won't. Everyone says that." She looked tired again, older than her years. "But we'll see." He wanted to say more, to explain, to apologize again, to somehow bridge the chasm between them. But Greta had appeared in the doorway behind Liora, and her expression made it clear he'd worn out his welcome. "Patterson's Inn," Liora repeated. "Ask for a room with a fire. Nights get cold here." Then she closed the door. Cale stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the cold northern air. The settlement spread out before him. Rough buildings, muddy streets, people going about their lives. It was nothing like the polished world he'd grown up in. But somewhere in that small house behind him were two children who were half his. A woman who'd loved him once and now barely tolerated him. A life he'd never known existed. He made his way to Patterson's Inn, arranged for a room, and spent the rest of the morning staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything. By evening, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going back south. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He'd spent 5 years living a lie, honoring contracts and alliances that had been built on manipulation and deceit. He'd played the part of the dutiful duke while his real life, his children, grew up hundreds of miles away. That ended now. Cale pulled out paper and ink and began writing letters. To his steward, authorizing him to manage the estate in his absence. To Marcus, thanking him for finally telling the truth. To the few friends he had left, explaining he was taking an extended leave. And then, before he could talk himself out of it, he wrote one more. This one went to his personal attorney with instructions to draw up documents acknowledging Rowan and Mira as his legitimate heirs. It would be complicated. There would be questions, scandals, political fallout. But he didn't care. His children weren't going to grow up as nameless bastards while he sat in comfort pretending they didn't exist. When he finally blew out the candle and lay down to sleep, Kale's last thought was of Rowan's serious gray eyes and Mira's fierce little scowl. Tomorrow he'd start earning their trust. However long it took. However hard it had to be. The next morning, Kale woke to shouting. He stumbled to the window and looked out. A crowd had gathered in the street, maybe 30 people, all talking at once. Someone was gesturing wildly. Someone else looked like they were crying. Kale dressed quickly and went downstairs. The innkeeper's wife was at the desk, wringing her hands. "What's happening?" Kale asked. "Fire," she said. "At the schoolhouse. Started sometime before dawn. The whole building's gone." Kale's blood went cold. "Was anyone inside?" "No, thank the stars. But all the books, the supplies, everything's destroyed." She shook her head. "Miss Leora's going to be heartbroken. She put her whole soul into that place." Cale was already moving, pushing through the front door and into the street. He ran toward the smoking ruins at the edge of town, his heart pounding. The schoolhouse, or what was left of it, was still smoldering. The roof had collapsed. The walls were blackened husks. A few men were hauling buckets of water, more out of habit than hope. And standing in front of it, staring at the destruction, was Liora. She looked small, fragile. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her face pale. Kyle approached slowly. "Liora." She didn't turn. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years of building something, gone in one night. "They can rebuild. With what money?" She laughed, hollow. "The town council barely funded the place when it was standing. You think they're going to find resources to rebuild?" Kyle looked at the ruins, at the crowd gathering, children, parents, all of them looking lost. This school had been more than just a building. It had been hope, progress, a promise that these kids could have something better. And now it was ash. "I can help," Kyle said. Liora finally looked at him. "No." "Liora." "I said no." Her voice was sharp. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity. It's, what, guilt money? A way to buy your way into their lives?" She shook her head. "I've survived this long without you. I'll survive this too." Kyle wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that pride wasn't going to educate 20 children or replace the books that had burned. But he could see in her eyes that pushing would only make it worse. So instead, he just stood there beside her and watched the smoke rise into the morning sky, and made a decision that would change everything. That night, while Liora was putting the twins to bed, Kyle met with the town council. He didn't tell them who he was, just that he was a merchant passing through with capital to invest, that he'd heard about the school fire and wanted to help. "Why?" one of them asked suspiciously. "Because I believe in education," Kyle said, which was true as far as it went. "And because Miss Vance is a good teacher. This town is lucky to have her." They talked for 2 hours. By the end, Kyle had committed enough money to rebuild the school twice over. New building, new books, new supplies. Everything. On one condition. They didn't tell Liora where the money came from. As far as she was concerned, it was a community effort. Donations from families. Support from neighboring settlements. The council agreed readily. They didn't care where the money came from, as long as the school got rebuilt. Kale left the meeting feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. Liora was going to be furious if she ever found out. But he couldn't stand by and watch her lose something she'd worked so hard to build, not when he could do something about it. He was halfway back to the inn when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Rowan stood in the shadows between two buildings, watching him. Kale's heart skipped. "What are you doing out here? It's late." "Followed you." The boy stepped into the light. "Mama thinks I'm asleep." "Does she know you sneak out?" "No." Rowan crossed his arms, a gesture so reminiscent of Liora it was startling. "Why are you giving money to the council?" Kyle went still. "How do you know about that?" "I was listening outside the meeting hall." The boy's eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're the one paying for the new school." There was no point in lying. Rowan was too smart for that. "Yes." "Why?" "Because your mother needs help, even if she won't admit it." Rowan studied him for a long moment. "She's going to be angry." "I know." "Then why do it?" Kale crouched down to the boy's level. "Because some things are worth making people angry. Your mother's work, the children in this town having a place to learn, that's worth it." Rowan didn't respond immediately. He just watched Kyle with those unsettlingly familiar eyes. "Are you my father?" he asked suddenly. The question knocked the air from Kale's lungs. "What?" "I'm not stupid. Mira is sometimes, but I'm not." Rowan's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "You look like me. You showed up right after Mama got a letter that made her upset. And you're staying here even though you don't belong." Kale didn't know what to say. Liora had made him promise not to tell them, but this child had already figured it out. "If I am," Kyle said carefully, "would that change anything?" Rowan considered this. "Maybe. I don't know yet." He paused. "Are you going to leave again?" "No." "People say things they don't mean all the time." "I know, but I mean it." Rowan stared at him for another long moment. Then, without warning, he turned and ran back into the shadows. Kyle stood alone in the empty street, his heart hammering. His son knew. And tomorrow, when Liora found out what he'd done with the money, everything was going to explode. The explosion came 3 days later, though not in the way Kyle expected. He was at the building site. The new school was already taking shape, timber frames rising from the scorched ground, when Rowan appeared at his elbow. The boy had been doing that lately, materializing without warning like a particularly determined ghost. "Mama knows," Rowan said quietly. Kale's hammer missed the nail entirely. He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Knows what?" "About the money. Mrs. Patterson told her yesterday. Said you were too modest to take credit, but everyone should know what a generous man you were." Rowan's expression was unreadable. "She didn't take it well." "Where is she now?" "Home. Greta says she's been pacing for an hour." The boy paused. "She broke a plate." Kale set down the hammer. "Was it an accident?" "No." "Right." Kale grabbed his coat. "Stay here. Don't follow me this time." "I'm going to follow you anyway." "I know, but at least pretend you won't." Rowan almost smiled. Almost. The walk to Leora's house felt like a march to the gallows. Every step, Kyle ran through possible explanations, apologies, justifications. None of them sounded adequate. He'd gone behind her back, violated her trust, done exactly what she'd asked him not to do. But the school was being rebuilt. The children would have a place to learn. That had to count for something. The door opened before he could knock. Liora stood there, and the look on her face made him take an involuntary step backward. "Inside," she said. Her voice was dangerously calm. "Now." Kael entered. Greta was in the kitchen with Mira, both of them conspicuously focused on kneading dough. The older woman caught his eye and shook her head slightly. A warning. Liora closed the door and turned on him. "You lied to me. I didn't." "Don't." She held up a hand. "You stood in my house and promised you wouldn't make grand gestures, wouldn't throw money around, wouldn't try to buy your way into their lives, and then you turned around and did exactly that." "I funded a school," Kael said. "Not a bribe. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided I wasn't capable of handling my own problems, so you swooped in with your fortune and fixed everything. Like I'm some charity case who needs rescuing." "That's not how I see you." "Then how do you see me, Kael?" Leora's eyes were bright with anger. "Because I've spent 5 years proving I don't need anyone, 5 years building a life on my own terms, and you show up and undermine all of it in 3 days. I wasn't trying to undermine you, I was trying to help." "I didn't ask for your help." "I know, but you needed it anyway." The words hung in the air between them. Leora's jaw tightened. "Get out!" "No." She blinked. "What?" "I said no." Kael took a breath, steadying himself. "You can be angry. You can hate me for overstepping, but I'm not leaving, and I'm not apologizing for making sure your students have a place to learn. This isn't about the students. Yes, it is. It's about 20 kids who deserve better than studying in someone's barn because the town can't afford a proper building. It's about you having the tools to do your job instead of making do with scraps." He stepped closer. "You're an incredible teacher, Liora. I watched you with those kids before the fire. They adore you. They're learning, and you were doing it with almost nothing. That's my choice, my struggle. And now it doesn't have to be." Kael's voice softened. "Why is accepting help so impossible for you?" "Because help comes with strings." Leora's composure cracked slightly. "Because every time I've relied on someone, they've used it against me. My father, my sister, you. I'm not them. Aren't you? You made decisions about my life without consulting me, just like they did. The only difference is you think you're being noble." Kael absorbed the hit. She wasn't entirely wrong. "You're right. I should have asked first. I should have—" He stopped, frustrated. "But you would have said no. We both know that." "Exactly. Because it's my decision to make." "Even if it's the wrong decision?" Leora's laugh was sharp. "Who are you to decide what's right for me? You've been in my life for a week. You don't know anything about what I need." "Then tell me." Kael spread his hands. "Tell me what you need. Because I'm here, and I'm trying, and I don't know what else to do." For a long moment, Liora just stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, her shoulders sagged. She moved to the table and sat, pressing her palms against her eyes. "I need you to stop trying to fix me," she said quietly. "I'm not broken." Kael sat across from her. "I know you're not. Do you? Because every time you do something like this, it feels like you think I'm failing, like I can't handle my own life." "That's not—" Kael stopped himself, thought about it. "Maybe that's how it seems, but that's not what I think. What I think is that you're the strongest person I've ever met, and that strength shouldn't have to mean doing everything alone." Liora lowered her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I don't know how to not do it alone anymore." "Then learn." He said it gently. "I'm not asking you to depend on me. I'm asking you to let me share the load. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the sound of children playing drifted through the window. Mira's laugh, sharp and bright. Rowan's quieter voice responding. "They're going to figure it out," Liora said finally. "If they haven't already. That you're their father. Rowan already knows." Leora's head snapped up. "What?" "He followed me to the council meeting, listened outside, confronted me afterward." Kael rubbed the back of his neck. "He's sharp, Liora. Sharper than either of us were at that age." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. We're close enough. He asked directly if I was his father. I didn't lie. Liora stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I was going to tell them myself. When they were older, when they could understand. They understand more than you think. They're 5 years old, Kyle, and they're not stupid. He joined her at the window. Rowan and Mira were in the yard, building something with sticks and mud. Mira was directing, gesturing wildly. Rowan was doing most of the actual work. Look at them, really look. They know something's different. They just don't have the words for it yet. Leora's reflection in the glass looked tired, conflicted. I wanted to protect them from this, from the complications. I know, but maybe... Kyle chose his words carefully. Maybe complications aren't always bad. Maybe they're just part of life. Spoken like someone who's never had to explain to a child why their father wasn't around for the first 5 years of their life. You're right, I haven't, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. He paused. So we can keep fighting about it, or we can figure out how to move forward. Your choice. Liora was quiet for a long moment. Then, if we do this, if I let you be part of their lives, it's on my terms. Not yours. Not the town's. Mine. Agreed. You don't buy their affection. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't disappear the moment things get difficult. I won't. And if I say it's not working, you respect that, even if it hurts, even if you disagree. Kale met her eyes. I respect that. She studied him, searching for something. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. All right, we'll try. She turned back to the window. But Kyle, if you break their hearts, I won't forgive you. Not ever. Understood. The back door opened. Mira burst in, covered head to toe in mud, grinning like she'd discovered gold. Mama, look, we built a fort. I see that. Leora's voice shifted instantly, warm, amused. You also built a new layer of dirt on yourself. It's not dirt, it's armor. Mira struck a dramatic pose. I'm a warrior. Warriors still take baths. Unfair. Rowan appeared in the doorway, considerably cleaner than his sister. His eyes went immediately to Kale, assessing, then to Liora, reading her mood with uncanny accuracy. Is everything okay? He asked. It's fine, Liora said. Mr. Ardent was just leaving. Kale took the hint. He nodded to Liora, then to the children. As he passed Rowan, the boy caught his sleeve. Tomorrow, Rowan said quietly. Come back tomorrow. After school. It wasn't a question. Kale glanced at Liora, who hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Tomorrow, Kale agreed. He left before he could overstay his welcome any further. The next afternoon, Kyle showed up at Leora's house with a worn leather satchel and no expectations. Liora answered the door, still in her teaching clothes, looking skeptical. What's in the bag? She asked. Tools? Wood? Nothing expensive, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I thought maybe Rowan would want to learn some basic carpentry, if that's all right, Liora called over her shoulder. Rowan, someone's here for you. The boy appeared, looked at Kale, then at the satchel. What are we making? Whatever you want, within reason. Rowan considered this. A birdhouse. Good choice. Get your coat. They worked in the yard while Mira watched from the porch, providing unsolicited commentary. Kyle showed Rowan how to measure twice and cut once, how to drive a nail straight, how to sand edges smooth. The boy picked it up quickly, his hand steady and precise. You're good at this, Kale observed. I like knowing how things fit together. Rowan lined up another nail. Mira likes stories and words. I like structures. What about your mother? She likes both. And people. She's good with people. He hammered the nail in perfectly, even when they don't deserve it. The comment hung in the air. Kyle decided not to touch it. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. On the porch, Mira had abandoned watching and was now trying to teach Greta a complicated clapping game. Their laughter drifted across the yard. Can I ask you something? Rowan said suddenly. Of course. Why did you leave? Before we were born. Kyle's hand stilled on the wood. This was it. The question he'd been dreading. He could lie, simplify, make himself sound better. Or he could tell the truth and let Rowan decide what to do with it. I didn't know your mother was pregnant. Kale said carefully. If I had known, I would have stayed. But I didn't, and I made other choices that hurt her badly. He set down his tools. Her father lied to both of us, made me think she didn't love me, made her think I didn't care. By the time I found out the truth, 5 years had passed. And now? Now I'm trying to make up for lost time. If you'll let me. Rowan studied the half-finished birdhouse. Mira will let you. She likes everyone until they give her a reason not to. He paused. I'm harder to convince. I know. So convince me. Kyle looked at his son, this serious, careful boy who'd learned too young to trust slowly. I can't do it with words. Only with time. So I'm asking you to give me that. Time to prove I mean what I say. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the sandpaper and went back to work. Okay, but I'm watching you. That's fair. They finished the birdhouse as the sun was setting. It wasn't perfect. A little crooked, one side slightly higher than the other, but it was solid. Rowan held it up, examining their work critically. It's good, Kale said. It's acceptable. But there was a hint of pride in the boy's voice. Can we make another one next week? If your mother says yes. They brought the birdhouse inside. Liora was cooking dinner, something that smelled like stew and bread. She turned when they entered, took in Rowan's expression, and something in her face softened. Can we hang it in the oak tree? Rowan asked her. Let me see it first. She examined the birdhouse from all angles. This is good work, both of you. Mostly him, Rowan said, nodding at Kyle. I just did the easy parts. That's not true, Kale said. You did half. Generous estimate. Liora handed the birdhouse back to Rowan. Go wash up for dinner. You too, Mira. The children disappeared upstairs. Liora turned to Kyle, arms crossed, but her expression wasn't hostile, just considering. He talked to you, she said. Some. Not much. That's more than he talks to most people. She moved back to the stove, stirring the pot. He doesn't trust easily. I noticed. He's protective of me, and of Mira, though she doesn't need it half as much as he thinks. Liora ladled stew into bowls. If he's letting you in, even a little, that means something. Kyle didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Liora glanced at him. Stay for dinner. It's not fancy, but there's enough. It was the first real olive branch she'd offered. Kyle accepted it carefully. I'd like that. Thank you. Dinner was chaotic in the way only a meal with small children could be. Mira talked non-stop about her day, barely pausing to eat. Rowan interrupted occasionally to correct her more egregious exaggerations. Greta added dry commentary that made everyone laugh. And Liora, Kale noticed, watched him. Assessing how he interacted with the children, how he responded to Mira's questions, whether he included Rowan in the conversation even when the boy was quiet. It felt like a test. Kyle did his best not to fail it. After dinner, Mira dragged him to the sitting room to show him her drawings. There were dozens. Crude stick figures, lopsided houses, animals that might have been horses or dogs or possibly dragons. This one's you, she announced, holding up a picture of a tall stick figure with scribbled dark hair. Kyle looked at it. The figure was standing next to a smaller figure with a triangle dress, presumably Liora, and two tiny figures holding hands. A family. When did you draw this? He asked. Yesterday. Mama said you might be staying for a while, so I wanted to practice drawing you in case I forgot what you looked like. She cocked her head. You're hard to draw. Your face is too symmetrical. I'm not sure that's an insult. It's not. It's just a fact. She thrust another drawing at him. This one's Rowan fighting a bear. Has Rowan fought many bears? Not yet. But he will someday. He's very brave. From across the room, Rowan rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Kale spent the next hour looking at drawings, hearing elaborate stories, and learning more about his children's inner worlds than he'd thought possible. Mira saw everything as an adventure waiting to happen. Rowan saw problems to be solved. Both were brilliant in completely different ways. When Liora finally shooed the children upstairs to bed, Kale realized he'd forgotten to feel awkward, forgotten to second-guess every word. He'd just been present, part of the evening's rhythm. Thank you, he said to Liora as she walked him to the door. For what? For letting me stay. For giving me a chance, like... She leaned against the doorframe, looking tired but less guarded than usual. Don't thank me yet. This is a trial. You could still mess it up spectacularly. I'm aware. And Kyle? She met his eyes. I meant what I said about the school funding. I'm grateful. Even if I'm still angry about how you did it. But don't do anything like that again without asking me first. I won't. Good. She paused. The birdhouse was a nice touch. Rowan doesn't open up to people easily. The fact that he worked with you today, that's significant. He told me I had to convince him I was worth trusting. He's right. You do. She pushed off the door frame. See you tomorrow? It was the first time she'd initiated future plans. Kyle tried not to show how much that meant. Tomorrow, same time? Earlier if you want. The children get home from school at 3. You could meet them here. I'll be here. She nodded and closed the door gently. Kyle walked back to the inn feeling like he'd won something small but important. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility, a foothold. It was more than he'd had a week ago. The following days fell into a pattern. Kyle would show up in the afternoon, help Rowan with whatever project had caught his interest, answer Mira's endless questions, and stay for dinner more often than not. Liora watched, always assessing, but she was warming, slowly. The town noticed, of course. People talked. The mysterious merchant who'd funded the school was now spending every evening at the teacher's house. Speculation ran rampant. Greta found it hilarious. Let them talk, she told Liora. Gives them something to do besides gossip about the Peterson affair. There's a Peterson affair? Not yet. But give it time. 2 weeks after the birdhouse, Rowan asked Kale a question that changed everything. They were working on a new project, a toy cart this time, when the boy set down his tools and looked at Kale directly. Are you planning to marry Mama? Kale nearly dropped the piece of wood he was holding. What? Mrs. Patterson asked me if you were courting Mama. I didn't know what that meant, so I asked Greta, and she said it's when adults spend time together before deciding to get married. Rowan's expression was perfectly serious. So are you? Kyle had no idea how to answer that. It's complicated. Adults always say that when the answer is yes, but they don't want to admit it. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just haven't been around to notice. The comment wasn't accusatory, just factual, but it landed like a punch anyway. Kale set down his tools and faced Rowan properly. Your mother and I have a difficult history. Things happened that hurt both of us. So right now I'm just trying to be someone she can trust again. Whether that leads to marriage or not, I don't know. That would be her choice. But you'd want to, if she said yes. It wasn't a question. Kale thought about lying, making it simpler, but Rowan deserved honesty. Yes, he said quietly. I'd want to. I loved your mother once. I think I still do. But love isn't enough if trust is broken. And I broke her trust badly. Rowan considered this. Mira thinks you're here to stay. She told me last night that we're going to be a real family now. And what do you think? I think families are more complicated than Mira realizes. But I also think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think if you wanted to leave, you would have left already. So maybe she's right. Something in Kyle's chest tightened. I'm not leaving, I promise you that. Everyone makes promises. I know, but I mean this one. Rowan held his gaze for a long moment, then picked up his tools and went back to work. But there was something different in his posture now, something less defensive. Trust, Kale realized. The beginning of it, at least. That evening, after dinner, Liora pulled Kale aside while Greta supervised the children's bedtime routine. We need to talk, she said. Kale's stomach sank. Those 4 words never led anywhere good. All right. She led him outside to the small garden behind the house. The night was cool, clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. Rowan told me about your conversation today, Liora said. He tells you everything, doesn't he? Most things. She wrapped her arms around herself, not quite looking at him. He wanted to know if I was upset that he'd asked you about marriage. Are you? No. Curious, yes. Upset, no. She finally met his eyes. Were you honest with him? As honest as I could be. Good. Liora took a breath. The children are getting attached to you, even Rowan, though he'd never admit it. And I need to know, I need to be absolutely certain that you understand what that means. It means I can't mess this up. It means more than that. It means if you're in, You're all in, not just for them, but for me too, because they don't separate us in their minds. If you're part of their lives, you're part of mine." She paused, and I'm not ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need you to know that's the eventual question. Not if you want to be their father. If you want to be my... She stopped, frustrated. I don't even know what to call it. Partner? Kale offered quietly. Maybe. If we get there. She looked up at the stars. I told myself I'd never depend on anyone again. Never let anyone close enough to hurt me. And then you showed up and complicated everything. I'm sorry. Don't be, just... She turned to face him fully. Be patient. With me. With this. I'm trying. But it's hard. Kale wanted to close the distance between them, to touch her, to promise her everything would be okay. But he held himself still. I can be patient. I've waited 5 years. I can wait as long as you need. Even if the answer ends up being no? The question hurt, but he answered honestly. Even then. Because being in their lives, in your life, even at a distance, is better than the alternative. Liora studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Just a little. You've changed. Have I? The Kael I knew 5 years ago would have pushed, would have tried to charm his way through my defenses or buy his way past them. She stepped closer. This version of you actually listens. I've had a lot of time to learn what happens when I don't. She was close enough now that he could see the freckles across her nose, barely visible in the starlight. Close enough that he could smell lavender, soap, or perfume, or just her. I'm still angry at you, she said softly, for believing the lies, for not fighting harder, for all of it. I know, but I'm starting to think, maybe, there might be room for something else besides anger. She reached out, tentative, and touched his hand, just her fingers against his, barely making contact. I don't know what yet, but something. Kale didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Liora! The back door burst open. Mira stood there in her nightgown, hair wild, grinning. Mama! Rowan threw up! The moment shattered. Liora pulled her hand back, already moving toward the house. How much? Everywhere. Perfect. She glanced back at Kale. You should probably go. This is going to be a long night. Do you need help? With vomit cleanup? Absolutely not. But she was smiling slightly as she said it. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. Kael left as Liora disappeared into the chaos of sick children and midnight laundry. He walked back to the inn with her touch still burning on his fingers, and something that felt dangerously like hope building in his chest. 3 weeks later, the new school opened. The entire town turned out for it. Families, children, even some people from neighboring settlements who'd heard about the fire and wanted to see the result. The building was simple but solid, with proper windows, a real roof, and enough space for twice as many students as before. Liora stood at the entrance, greeting people, looking both proud and overwhelmed. She'd worked with the builders every day, making sure every detail was right. Now, watching children pour through the doors, she seemed almost in shock that it was real. Kale hung back, letting her have the moment. But she found him in the crowd, and to his surprise, waved him over. You should be up here too, she said. This wouldn't exist without you. It wouldn't exist without you, he countered. I just provided materials. You provided the vision. Stop being modest. It's unsettling. He laughed. Around them, people were chattering, children were exploring the new space, and the town council was giving speeches nobody was listening to. It was chaos. It was perfect. Mira appeared, dragging Rowan behind her. Can we pick our desks? Please, please, please. Go ahead, Liora said. But don't fight about it. We never fight, Mira said, already running inside. We fight constantly, Rowan corrected, following at a more measured pace. When they were gone, Liora turned to Kael. Thank you. Really. For all of this. You're welcome. She hesitated, then said quietly, The children asked me something last night. About whether you were staying permanently, or if this was temporary. What did you tell them? That I didn't know, that it was complicated. She looked up at him. But I think I'd like it to be permanent, if you're willing, not just the school funding or the occasional visits, actually staying, being part of this. Kale's heart stopped. Are you sure? No, not at all. She laughed, shaky. But I think that's part of it. Taking the risk anyway. Liora, don't make this into something bigger than it is, she said quickly. I'm not promising you anything except a chance. A real one. To be their father. To be… She stopped. To be in our lives, properly. It was everything he'd hoped for and been too afraid to ask. Cale wanted to kiss her, to spin her around, to shout it to the whole town. Instead, he just took her hand, properly this time, not hesitant, and squeezed gently. I'm willing, he said. More than willing. She squeezed back. Good, because they're already planning your birthday party. Mira wants cake and Rowan wants a mathematics competition. A what? Don't ask, just go with it. Inside the school, children's voices rose in excitement. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, washing the settlement in gold. And standing there with Leora's hand in his and their children somewhere in the building behind them, Kyle felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Home. He was finally home. Kyle didn't sleep. He sat at the window of his room, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale blue, knowing that today everything would either break or begin to heal. By the time the sun was fully up, he'd made his decision. No more hiding, no more half-truths. If Liora was going to hate him anyway, it might as well be for the right reasons. He found her at Greta's house, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. The twins were still asleep upstairs. Greta took one look at Kyle's face and excused herself without a word. Liora glanced up. It's early. I need to tell you something. Kyle closed the door behind him. And you're going to be angry. She set down her cup slowly. What did you do? I paid for the school. The silence that followed was absolute. Leora's face went through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and then, finally, fury. You what? I met with the town council last night. Gave them enough money to rebuild everything. New building, books, supplies, all of it. Liora stood so fast her chair scraped across the floor. You had no right. I know. I told you I didn't want your charity. It's not charity. It's you trying to control things, her voice was rising. Trying to buy your way into our lives because you can't stand the fact that I don't need you. You do need help, Liora. There's no shame in that. Don't you dare tell me what I need. She was shaking now, hands clenched at her sides. I've spent 5 years building something here, 5 years earning respect, proving I could stand on my own. And you swoop in with your money and your guilt, and you make me look weak. That's not what I was trying to… I don't care what you were trying to do. She moved toward him, eyes blazing. You think throwing money at the problem makes up for not being here? For missing everything? You think you can just erase 5 years with a donation to the town council? No, Kyle said quietly. I know I can't. But those children need a school, and you need a place to teach. I couldn't stand by and watch it all burn down because you're too stubborn to accept help. Stubborn? She laughed, sharp and bitter. That's rich coming from you. Leora, get out. No. The word hung in the air between them. Liora stared at him, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. What did you say? I said no. Kyle took a step forward. I'm not leaving. Not the house, not the town, not your life. You can be angry, you can hate me, but I'm not going anywhere. Because I've spent 5 years being a coward, and I'm done. You don't get to decide that. Neither do you. His voice was firmer now. I'm their father. That's not a role I earned, and it's not one I deserve, but it's what I am. And I'm going to fight for them, even if that means fighting you. Leora's breath caught. For a moment, she just looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to see past the anger to whatever was underneath. You can't just show up and demand to be part of their lives, she said, but her voice was quieter now. I'm not demanding anything. I'm asking, begging, if that's what it takes. Kyle ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. I know I don't have any right to be here. I know I screwed up in every way possible, but I'm here now and I'm not running away again. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Why now? Why do you suddenly care? Because I finally know the truth. Because Marcus showed me the letters your father forged. Showed me how every single thing I believed about you was a lie. He paused. Because I spent 5 years married to the wrong sister and trying to convince myself it didn't matter. And because the moment I saw Rowan and Mira, I knew, his voice cracked. I knew I'd already lost too much time. Liora sank back into her chair. She looked defeated, tired. The money for the school, can you take it back? No. Can you at least tell them to say it came from somewhere else? I already did. As far as anyone knows, it's community donations. Your name's the only one attached to the project. She looked up at him, surprised. Why would you do that? Because this is your town, your school, your reputation. I'm not trying to take that from you. I just wanted to help without making things harder. Liora was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the settlement was waking up. Footsteps, voices, the normal rhythms of morning. Inside, everything felt suspended. Rowan knows, she said finally. Kale's stomach dropped. How he came to me last night, after you met with the council. She smiled faintly, without humor. He followed you, heard everything, then came home and asked me if you were his father. What did you tell him? The truth. That yes, you are. That you didn't know about them until a few days ago. That I was still figuring out what that means. She met his eyes. He asked if you were staying. I told him I didn't know. What did he say? He said he wanted you to stay. Leora's voice was soft. He said Mira does too, even though she won't admit it, and that they want to know you, but only if you're really going to be here. Not just visiting, actually here. Kale felt something loosen in his chest. And you? What do you want? Liora looked away. I don't know. Part of me wants you gone. Wants to go back to the way things were, when it was just the three of us and I didn't have to share them with anyone. But that's not fair to them. They deserve to know their father, if he's worth knowing. She paused. Are you? Worth knowing? I don't know, Kyle said honestly. I've made a lot of mistakes, hurt a lot of people, but I want to try. I want to be someone they can be proud of. They're 5 years old. They're proud when they tie their own shoes. Then I'll start there. Liora almost smiled. Then footsteps thundered overhead, the twins waking up. A moment later, Mira's voice drifted down. Mama, Rowan says you're fighting with that man again. We're not fighting, Liora called back. We're talking. It sounds like fighting. Liora sighed and stood. Come down for breakfast, both of you. The twins appeared a few minutes later, Mira in the lead, as always, Rowan trailing behind with his serious expression. They both stopped when they saw Kyle still there. You're still here, Mira said accusingly. I am. Why? Kale glanced at Liora. She nodded slightly. Permission, or maybe just resignation. Because I'm your father, Kyle said, and I'd like to get to know you, if you'll let me. Mira's eyes went wide. She looked at Rowan. You were right. I'm usually right, Rowan said calmly. Mira turned back to Kyle, hands on her hips. If you're our father, where have you been? Mira, Liora started. No, it's a fair question. Kale crouched down to Mira's level. I didn't know you existed. Your mother and I, we lost touch a long time ago. If I'd known about you, I would have been here. Promise? Promise. Mira considered this. Rowan says you're rich. Mira, Liora said sharply. What? He does. Mira looked at Kyle. Are you? Yes. How rich? Mira, that's enough. Very rich, Kyle said. I'm a duke. Do you know what that is? Both children shook their heads. It means I have a lot of land and a big house and people who work for me and responsibilities to a lot of other people. Like a king? Mira asked. Sort of, but less powerful. Rowan spoke up for the first time. If you're a duke, why are you here? Shouldn't you be in your big house doing duke things? Maybe, but I'd rather be here getting to know my children. The words hung in the air. Liora busied herself at the stove, but Kyle could see the tension in her shoulders. Can we see your house? Mira asked. Someday, if you want to. Is it far? Very far. It would take days to get there. Mira frowned. Then how are you going to be here and there? I'm going to be here, Kyle said firmly. The house, And the Duke things can wait. Rowan was watching him with those calculating eyes. For how long? As long as you'll have me. What if we don't want you? The question should have hurt. Instead, Kyle just felt a rush of pride. His son was smart enough to ask the hard questions, brave enough to protect his mother and sister. Then I'll still stay nearby, Kyle said, in case you change your mind. But I won't force myself on you. That's not how this works. Rowan studied him for another moment. Then, apparently satisfied, he moved to the table and climbed into his chair. I'm hungry. Mira followed, still chattering. Do you have horses? I want to learn to ride. Mama says I'm too young, but I don't think I am. Rowan's scared of horses, but I'm not. I'm not scared of anything. You're scared of spiders, Rowan pointed out. That's different. Spiders are creepy. So are horses, if you think about it. They're huge and they have big teeth, but they don't have 8 legs. Liora set bowls of porridge in front of them. Eat, both of you. Kale stood slowly, not sure if he was supposed to leave or stay. Liora glanced at him. You might as well sit down, she said, unless you have somewhere else to be. He sat. Breakfast was chaotic. Mira talked non-stop, asking questions about everything from ducal estates to whether Kyle had ever fought in a war to what his favorite color was. Rowan ate methodically, occasionally interjecting with questions that were far more pointed. Do you know how to read? Yes. What's the biggest number you can count to? I'm not sure. I've never tested my limit. Can you do multiplication? Yes. What's 7 times 8? 56. Rowan looked satisfied. Liora hid a smile behind her teacup. When breakfast was over and the twins had been sent to get dressed, Liora walked Kyle to the door. That went better than I expected, he said. Don't get comfortable. Mira likes everyone until she decides she doesn't. And Rowan's still making up his mind about you. I know. Kale paused. What about you? Have you made up your mind? Or Liora crossed her arms. I'm allowing you to be part of their lives. That doesn't mean I've forgiven you or that I trust you. It just means I'm willing to see if you're serious. I am. We'll see. She opened the door. The town council's holding a meeting this afternoon to discuss the school rebuilding. You should be there, since you're funding it. I thought we were keeping that quiet. We are. But you're staying in Frost Hollow, which means you're part of the community, and community members come to council meetings. Her eyes held a challenge. Unless you're not planning to actually participate in the town, just throw money at it from a distance. Kyle smiled slightly. I'll be there. Good. She started to close the door, then paused. Kyle, thank you. For the school. Even if you went about it the wrong way. The door closed before he could respond. Kale stood on the porch for a moment, feeling lighter than he had in days. Then he headed back to the inn to change clothes and prepare for his first official appearance as a member of Frost Hollow. The council meeting was packed. Apparently word had spread about the mysterious benefactor funding the school, and everyone wanted to know who it was. Kale slipped into the back, trying to be inconspicuous. It didn't work. Within minutes, people were staring, whispering. The stranger from the south, the one staying at Patterson's. What was he doing here? When the meeting started, the council chair, a burly man named Henderson, outlined the rebuilding plan. Better materials this time. Bigger space. Room for 30 students instead of 20. All thanks to an anonymous donor, Henderson said, which caused a fresh wave of whispers. Someone called out, "Who is it? We should know who's helping us." The donor wishes to remain anonymous, Henderson said firmly. We should respect that. But if it's someone local, it's not, Kyle said quietly. Every head turned. Kale stood, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place he looked in this rough timber hall full of miners and trappers. It's me, he continued. I'm the donor, and I'm not from here, but I'm staying, for the foreseeable future. The silence was deafening. Then a woman near the front spoke up, one of the mothers whose children attended the school. Why? Because education matters. Because this town deserves better, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I have personal reasons for wanting to be part of this community. What kind of personal reasons? Someone else called out. Before Kyle could answer, the door at the back opened. Liora walked in, the twins trailing behind her. She'd clearly come straight from teaching, There was chalk dust on her skirt and ink on her fingers. She surveyed the room, taking in the tense atmosphere, the way everyone was staring at Kyle. "He's the father of my children," she said calmly. The room erupted. Kyle's stomach dropped. He'd expected her to keep that quiet, at least for a while longer. But she was standing there, head high, daring anyone to say something. Henderson banged his gavel, calling for order. When the noise finally died down, he looked between Kyle and Liora. "Miss Vance?" he said carefully. "Is this true?" "Yes." Her voice didn't waver. "Lord Arden is Rowan and Mira's father. We were involved years ago before I came to Frost Hollow. He recently discovered they existed and chose to come here to be part of their lives." "Lord Ardent," someone repeated. "Your nobility?" "I'm a duke, yes," Kyle said. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because my children are here. And I intend to stay." More muttering, people exchanging glances. Kyle could see the calculations happening. A duke in Frost Hollow, money, influence. What did that mean for the town? One of the council members spoke up. "With all due respect, Your Grace—" "Just Kyle," he interrupted. "Please." "Kyle, then, you're funding the school out of guilt?" The question was blunt. Kyle appreciated it. "Partially, yes, but also because it's the right thing to do. This town has taken care of my children for 5 years. The least I can do is help make it a better place for them to grow up." "And when you get bored," another voice called out, "when being a duke in the wilderness loses its charm, what happens to the school then? To the money you've promised?" "I won't get bored," Kale said. "And the money isn't a promise. It's already deposited with the Territorial Bank. Regardless of what happens to me, the school will be built." Liora was watching him with an unreadable expression. The twins had found seats near the front, looking fascinated by all the commotion. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, this is certainly unexpected, but if the money's already committed and Miss Vance vouches for him—" "I'm not vouching for anything except his biology," Liora said sharply. "Whether he's trustworthy remains to be seen." Several people laughed. The tension in the room eased slightly. They spent the next hour going over practical details, timelines, materials, contractors. Kyle stayed quiet, letting the council lead. He'd said his piece. Now he just needed to follow through. When the meeting finally ended, people approached him. Some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. Kyle answered questions patiently, accepting the scrutiny as his due. Then a miner named Garrett, a big man with scarred knuckles and a perpetual scowl, stepped forward. "My daughter's in that school," he said. "Sarah, 7 years old, couldn't read a word before Miss Vance started teaching her." Kale nodded. "I'm glad— Oh, if you do anything to hurt Miss Vance or those kids," Garrett continued, his voice low and dangerous, "Duke or not, you'll answer to me. Understood?" Kale met his eyes. "Understood." Garrett stared at him for another moment, then nodded and walked away. Liora appeared at Kale's elbow. "Garrett likes you." "That was him liking me?" "He didn't threaten to break your legs. For Garrett, that's practically friendship." She glanced around the emptying hall. "That was stupid announcing it like that. You're the one who told everyone." "I know, but I had to. People were already talking, making up stories. Better to control the narrative." She looked tired. "This is going to change things. You understand that, right? The whole town knowing." "I know." "The twins are going to have questions, lots of them. I'll answer them. And when they ask why you weren't here before? When they want to know why I left? What are you going to tell them?" Kyle was quiet for a moment. "The truth. That people made mistakes. That sometimes families are complicated. And that we're trying to do better now." Liora studied him. "They're going to be angry. Especially when they get older and understand what it means that you weren't there." "I know." "And you're still staying?" "Yes." She shook her head, but there was something almost like approval in her eyes. "You really are serious about this." "I told you I was." Saying it and doing it are different things. She gathered the twins who'd been examining the council chamber like it was a fascinating new world. "Come on, time to go home." "Can Kyle come?" Mira asked. Liora paused, looked at Kyle. "Do you want to?" "If you don't mind." "I mind plenty of things, but yes, you can come." They walked back through the settlement together, an unlikely unit that drew stares and whispers. Kyle could feel the weight of judgment, curiosity, speculation. But beside him, Mira was chattering about something she'd learned in class, and Rowan was quietly holding his mother's hand, and none of it seemed to matter as much. At the house, Liora made tea while the twins showed Kyle their books, their drawings, the collection of rocks Rowan had accumulated and organized by size and color. Mira demonstrated how she could stand on one foot for a full minute. Rowan showed Kyle a complex pattern he'd made with sticks and stones. It was ordinary, mundane, and the best afternoon Kyle had spent in years. When it started to get dark, he stood to leave. Rowan looked up from his book. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" "If your mother says it's all right." Rowan looked at Liora. She sighed. "Tomorrow's fine. We're having stew for dinner. 6 o'clock. Kale felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "I'll be here." Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Kale stood for a moment, looking up at the stars. They were brighter here than in the capital, undimmed by city lights. He'd given up a lot to be here, his estate, his position, the comfortable lie of his old life. But standing here with the promise of dinner tomorrow and 2 children who were starting to know him, he couldn't find it in himself to regret it. The days turned into weeks. Kyle became a familiar presence in Frost Hollow, helping with the school construction, joining council meetings, slowly becoming part of the community fabric. People stopped staring, started nodding hello. Garrett even bought him a drink at the tavern one night, which Liora said was a significant milestone. The twins warmed to him gradually. Mira decided he was acceptable when he helped her build a snow fort that could withstand Rowan's siege tactics. Rowan started asking him for help with arithmetic, which turned into longer conversations about numbers and patterns and how things worked. Kyle learned their routines, their preferences, their peculiarities. Learned that Mira was afraid of the dark but would never admit it. That Rowan had nightmares sometimes and needed to be held. That both of them had Leora's stubbornness and his tendency to overthink everything. He learned to be a father, not a perfect one. He made mistakes constantly, forgot things, said the wrong thing at the wrong time. But he showed up, every day. And slowly, that started to matter. Liora remained distant, polite but guarded. She let him into the children's lives but kept her own carefully walled off. Kale didn't push. He'd earned her distrust. The least he could do was respect it. Then, 3 months after his arrival, Marcus showed up. Kale was at the construction site, helping haul timber, when someone called his name. He turned and saw his former brother-in-law standing at the edge of the clearing, looking utterly out of place in his fine traveling clothes. "Marcus?" Kale set down the beam he was carrying. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you. Your steward said you'd gone north. Took a while to track you down." Marcus looked around the construction site, taking in the rough timber frame, the mud, the workers. "This is where you've been? Building a school?" "Among other things." Marcus's gaze sharpened. "I heard rumors that you'd found Liora, that she had children." "They're not rumors." "Then it's true." Marcus looked stunned. "You have... how many?" "Twins, a boy and a girl, 5 years old." "My niece and nephew." Marcus sank onto a pile of lumber. "Does Liora know I'm the one who told you?" "She knows." "Is she angry?" "She was. She's moved past it." Kale wiped sweat from his forehead. "What do you need, Marcus?" "Need?" Marcus looked confused. "I don't need anything. I came to check on you. You disappeared without warning, left your entire estate in someone else's hands. I was worried." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "You're hauling timber in the middle of nowhere." "I'm helping build a school for my children," Kale corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. About the letters, the lies, all of it. I should have said something years ago. You were a kid. It wasn't your responsibility. I still should have." Marcus stood. "Can I meet them? The children?" Kale hesitated. "That's Leora's decision, not mine." "Will you ask her?" "Yes." That evening, Kale brought it up over dinner. The twins were in bed and he and Liora were cleaning up, a routine that had developed without either of them quite noticing. "Marcus is here," he said. "He wants to meet Rowan and Mira." Leora's hand stilled in the dishwater. "Why?" "Because they're his niece and nephew. Because he's the one who told me the truth. He feels responsible." "He should." But her voice lacked heat. What do you think? I think it's your choice. But Marcus is a good person. He tried to protect you when everything was falling apart. Liora was quiet for a long time. Bring him tomorrow, for lunch. The twins can meet him, but Kael… I know, one wrong move and he's gone. She almost smiled. You're learning. Marcus's visit the next day was awkward at first. He brought gifts, books for the children, a shawl for Liora. That felt too expensive, too much. But when he sat down with Rowan and Mira and simply talked to them like actual people, not like fragile objects, they warmed to him. Mira showed him her rock collection. Rowan asked about the capital, what the buildings looked like, how many people lived there. Marcus answered patiently, never talking down to them. Later, while the twins were playing outside, Marcus sat with Liora. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for not stopping him. Father, I mean. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I didn't know how to… He stopped. I was a coward. You were 16, Liora said, old enough to know better. Maybe. She looked out the window at the twins. But you told the truth eventually. That's more than most people manage. Is that forgiveness? It's acknowledgement. Forgiveness takes longer. Marcus nodded. Fair enough. He stayed for 3 days, getting to know his niece and nephew, reconnecting with his sister. When he left, he hugged Liora, brief, awkward, but genuine. If you need anything, he said, anything at all, I'm here now. I know. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow and turning the roads to rivers of mud. The school was nearly finished, a sturdy building with real windows and a chimney that didn't smoke. Liora spent hours planning the curriculum, organizing books, preparing for the official opening. The twins turned 6. Kael threw them a party, too big, too elaborate, but the children loved it. Half the town showed up. Garrett gave Rowan a pocket knife, which horrified Liora until Kael promised to teach him to use it safely. Mira got a new book and read the first chapter aloud to anyone who would listen. It felt like belonging. One night, in early summer, after the twins were asleep, Kael and Liora sat on the porch steps. The settlement was quiet, just the sound of crickets and a distant dog barking. I've been thinking, Liora said, about custody, official arrangements. Kael's stomach tightened. What kind of arrangements? Shared. You're their father. That should be legal, not just biological. She pulled out a folded paper. I spoke to an attorney. He drew up documents acknowledging you as their legal parent, with equal say in decisions about their upbringing. Kael took the paper with shaking hands. Liora, don't make a big thing of it. It's just practical. If something happened to me, they should go to you, not get shuffled off to distant relatives. She paused. And you've earned it. The last 6 months, you've shown up every single day. You've put their needs first. That matters. Thank you. Kael's voice was rough. This means… I know what it means. She looked at him. I'm not saying I've forgiven everything. I'm not saying we're suddenly a perfect family, but I am saying you're part of their lives now, permanently, and I want that recognized. Kael signed the documents with a hand that shook only slightly. The school opened in August. The whole town turned out for the ceremony. Henderson gave a speech about community and progress. Liora said a few words about the importance of education, and then the children rushed inside, claiming desks, running their hands over new books. Kael stood at the back, watching. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, the miner said gruffly. Liora did the hard part. Sure, but you showed up. That's something. Later, when everyone had left and Liora was organizing supplies, Kael found her in the classroom. Need help? He asked. I've got it. Let me help anyway. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, shelving books, arranging desks. Finally, Liora spoke. I've been offered a position at the Territorial Education Board, developing curriculum for other settlements. Kael's hands stilled. That's incredible. Congratulations. It would mean traveling 3-4 days a month. Someone else would have to teach on those days. I could do it, Kael said immediately. Or we could hire someone. I was thinking you could do it. She looked at him. You're good with them. The children respect you, and you understand the material better than half the teachers in the territory. I've never taught before. Neither had I. She smiled faintly. We figure things out. That's what we do. Kael felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Trust, maybe. Or at least the possibility of it. "I'd be honored," he said. That night, at dinner, Liora told the twins about the new arrangement. Rowan processed it quietly, already planning how to organize the classroom in her absence. Mira was delighted. "Does this mean Kael's staying forever?" she asked. Liora glanced at Kael. "I think so, if he wants to." "I do," Kael said. Mira grinned. "Good. Because you're useful." Rowan smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Very useful." The years that followed weren't perfect. There were arguments, setbacks, moments when old wounds reopened. But there were also school plays and birthday parties and quiet evenings around the fire. There were moments when Kael looked at his children, brilliant, fierce, extraordinary, and felt grateful for every mistake that had led him here. Liora never fully let her guard down, but she softened, laughed more, let Kael into parts of her life she'd kept locked away. They never became what they'd been before, that young couple drunk on first love, but they became something else. Partners, co-parents, friends, and sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, something that felt almost like the beginning of healing. One autumn evening, when the twins were 8 and arguing about something incomprehensible at the dinner table, Liora caught Kael's eye across the chaos. She didn't say anything, just looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was enough. Kael smiled back. Outside, the settlement sprawled beneath a sky full of stars. Inside, 2 children who'd been born from lies and loss were growing up surrounded by truth and love. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was theirs. And that, somehow, was everything.